All right, everyone. Welcome back. We're going to be finishing up our essay process here by talking about conclusions, what should be in them, how to write them, how to make a powerful one, and kind of just, looking at the whole essay process put together, right? So we start with step one, we analyze our prompt, we create a thesis statement, right? We go to step two, we take our thesis statement and we turn it into an introduction using these steps to create this, right? Down below, there's an example of an introduction. We go to step three, we analyze evidence, which was my prior video. And this takes some time, but it's the meat of your essay. It's like the biggest part of it, right? And then we go to step four. This is where you're going to write your conclusion, right? I find that a lot of students struggle with conclusions because what they do is they restate their thesis and then they feel like they have nowhere to go from there. They kind of at times will restate their thesis like three times in three sort of different ways and then call it a day, right? Now, that's not necessarily what a conclusion should be in an essay, all right? Your conclusion is going to be your final thoughts on the topic that you're writing about. Now, the other thing that you can use a conclusion for is to sort of ruminate or think about the sort of concept that you've introduced in your thesis statement, all right? You can add new points in your conclusion, you just don't support them with evidence or anything like that. It's just kind of your final thoughts on everything, right? If you come to some great idea in your conclusion, my biggest suggestion is maybe think about making that great idea into its own paragraph and adding to your essay. Not all essays are 5 paragraphs, right? I know that's hard to think about as a 10th grader or 11th grader, but you will eventually write 15 page papers, 20 page papers, 30 page papers. To get my bachelor's degree, I had to write a 35 page paper, right, on Shakespeare. Thank you, Jeffrey Kahan, for that. And then ultimately, to get my master's degree, I had to write an 85 page paper as an action research project, right? Although my personal paper was 116 pages, so it was actually about 30 pages longer. Now, the way we do that is we just add more more ideas to our paper and we support them with more evidence and the whole thing grows. I just find that students often get to their conclusion, they have like a great idea and then they never develop it, right? In college, you would develop that. You would move it up, make a paragraph out of it. And the conclusion's a good way to develop these things, right? Because you're done with your paper. You've said everything that you think you're going to say. And then sometimes new ideas come to you and you go, oh shoot, I should have talked about that, right? So our conclusion is a place that we can do that, right? Now, I don't want you to think that the conclusion is overly complicated. It truly is not. It's actually a very simple thing. So the first thing you want to do is review your thesis, right? This is going to remind your audience what the point of your essay was, all right? The second thing you want to do is review your reasons and possibly key evidence for those reasons that prove the thesis, okay? It says you might also spitball some reasons you didn't use but want to mention here as notable. That's what I was talking about when I said that there might be other ideas that come to you. Those ideas are still worth mentioning because your reader is still going to go, wow, that's smart, that's a good idea, right? Like, wow, that's clever, yeah. They're going to be able to see your final thoughts and see those as noteworthy, right? And then the last thing you do is you create a so what statement. I call it a so what statement. Other teachers call it lots of different things. Like I've heard essence of humanity. I think from Life McElliott. At my old school, Douglas McKay. He was my master teacher, and we always wanted to, narrow down our language on how to talk about this stuff. But I say, why does all of this matter to humanity, society, morality, philosophy, or some larger picture? In essence, why did you write about this topic, right? Now, some of these things are hard for young people to think about. For example, you guys don't know a lot about how society works, right? You might have some moral background, but it's probably from your like church or, life lessons that you've learned. Philosophy is really the study of the human experience, right? And if people don't have a lot of philosophical background or a lot of human experience, sometimes it's hard to say something in your so what statement. I actually remember struggling with this myself in high school because I thought that I had already said my so what statement, right? Because I thought my thesis statement was my so what statement. But if you guys were to look back at step 2, where we have in our intro this part, in our thesis this part, it says, if this is true, then people should do their best to help others and seize the moment to truly live life to its fullest, right? That's going to kind of give us an idea for what our so what statement should be, all right? So if we go back here, assuming we've done everything correct, assuming we're completely done with our essay, we can begin working on this. It says, state this thesis in a new way. If you wrote 2 versions of your thesis statement, you have already done that. I would also say a good way to do this is just simply don't look at your thesis and state it again from memory. It will be a fresh way of stating your thesis, all right? Then it says, provide a so what statement based on the importance of the thesis statement. This should not be restating your thesis, okay? Why does the author's message matter in the real world, all right? So this is really going to ask you to think about this as if, this happened to you or something. Like, why would this matter, right? Or what does it teach us? What's the moral of the story, essentially? What should we walk away believing? All of those are good ways to think about that part, all right? So there are some potential frames for the conclusion. It says, review the claim. It is clear based on the many moments in the text that something. Now, I wouldn't say that you should always use this frame. Sometimes my students use it every single time and they don't like spice it up at all. And so every single time I see the many moments in the text that, right? And you want to eventually grow out of this and kind of create your own original way to restate stuff. It says restate your reasons. The audience can see this because of blank, blank, and blank. And then so what? This conclusion demonstrates that big statement about the real world, right? So let's start this off down here, all right? I'm not going to use the sentence frame, but you can still see it above. And I know my thesis is something to do with death being inevitable and that no one can escape it, right? So I'm going to start with ultimately. Ultimately is a good transition to use here because this is our final sort of paragraph. We could also do finally. We could say in conclusion. There are lots of ways to transition here. But I'm going to say ultimately, right? And I'm going to re-say my thesis. Ultimately, death. Nope, not personified. Death. You guys know that if you put a capital letter, it actually means that it's that word personified. Like if I put love, it would be the personification of love. But anyways, ultimately death is something that everyone will face. And there is no escaping the inevitability. Yes? Wow, nailed it first try. I've been struggling with that word like the whole time, and it's just not even a hard word. There's no escaping the inevitability of it, period. Okay, that's restating my thesis statement, all right? This is seen throughout the short story through the character of Prospero, the symbol of the clock or time ticking by, and the overall revel that is occurring in the Abbey. All right. Now, If you wanted to, you could go back to step one in order to review your thesis. But in truth, your thesis should be something that you're so familiar with that you don't need to go back and like look at that. You just wrote a whole essay on it, right? You should know what your thesis is from memory. So, I didn't go back and look at my three things that I'm talking about, and I actually stated them out of order on purpose, right? So, my first paragraph was actually on the revel, but you'll notice that it's the last thing that I mentioned. This is to make it like a little bit more fresh for my audience, so that it doesn't sound exactly the same, like the same repetitive format, right? Happening again and again. I also phrase it as the overall revel that is occurring in the abbey, right? The symbol of the clock or time ticking by. That's not how I phrased it initially, all right? Here is where I might add some other deep thoughts or reasons or sort of commentary on the author and the story if I wanted to, all right? But first, I'm going to just create a so what statement, and then we'll look at adding that a little bit later. So I'm going to say this conclusion, I'll use the frame here. Now, here's again where we want to think about our sort of essence of humanity, our sort of why does this all matter? And I think that right now, when we're facing sort of a global pandemic where our leadership may or may not have done a good job, where we have a singular person or group of people that are supposed to be watching out for us, this story is especially pertinent, right? It is touching closer than maybe it could have in another time period, right? So I think that those are all things that are worthy of discussion here, right? And I think during this time period, we have people who are struggling, who could be struggling less if their neighbors would band together and sort of help them out. We only get so much government aid, and if as communities we were stronger and less individualistic or less tribal, we might be able to alleviate the suffering of others, right? So this conclusion demonstrates that people should do their best to help others because at times there is great suffering in the world that is too much for one person to bear alone. Furthermore, now, okay, I could stop there, right? I could just say that's it, I'm not going to write anymore. And I know many of you will stop there, right? But I have more to say. Like, I really want to elaborate on this because I think it's important, right? And if we don't say those things, they just don't get said, if that makes sense. And our writing is our thoughts, right, on paper. And for me, this sort of idea matters, right? So I'm going to say, furthermore, okay, so I get pretty philosophical here. I say, furthermore, those people who have power and ability to help others who are suffering should feel obligated to help them because all people are dealing with a similar pain and human existence, right? I think it's like Gandhi who says that you should be good to other people because, you never know who's carrying a heavy burden. You might see that on a bunch of inspirational posters and stuff like that. But also, if you were to look at Friedrich Nietzsche, for example, Nietzsche talks about willpower and how people should use it, right? For Nietzsche, he believes that, if you're strong, you have more obligation to use your willpower essentially like responsibly, right? So I kind of go into a little bit of that. Now, I've also read about Gandhi, right? I've also read parts of Der Zermacht by Nietzsche. So these thoughts naturally come to me as important to mention, right? And that's the cool thing about the essay process is that as you grow, it grows. Your essays can always be used in this format. You can always use this process to make them stronger, which is neat, right? It's a tool you will never grow out of. And in fact, I could write a better paper using this process than maybe without, right? It keeps me focused on specific things, right? Now, that's all I have to do for my conclusion, okay? However, if I wanted to add some more sauce, some more thoughts, they would kind of come right here before I say this conclusion demonstrates, right? This is where I might talk about the author. This is where I might talk about some other things that I didn't mention. But if I was going to say something about, let's say, Edgar Allan Poe, let's say, okay, so I write Edgar Allan Poe creates a moment of true human reflection on the nature of power, obligation, duty to others, and human suffering and arrogance, right? Because Prince Prospero is very arrogant. Again, going back to his name, he feels that he's prosperous and essentially doesn't owe anything to anyone who isn't, right? I say these powerful themes. Through these powerful themes, he moves his audience from an opulent party in a Gothic setting to an understanding of life that is profound. Opulent is a really good word to describe like a sort of rich setting, okay? If you've ever seen the movie The Great Gatsby, opulent is a good way to describe all of the parties in that movie. The Gothic setting is the Abbey. You can imagine the Abbey as a Gothic cathedral, which has certain hallmarks to it also, but this is not a video on architecture, even though I could talk probably for days about Gothic cathedrals. So what I did here is I added some other reasoning or things that I wanted to talk about that I didn't touch on in my paper, all right? And this doesn't really have a place in the paper, sort of outside of this moment, right? Where I'm speculating or talking about the author and why this piece is notable, right? Now, what we don't want to do is something like this, which I have seen students do. Sometimes students will do this, like they'll kind of suck up to the author. They'll be like, this author is so cool and this story was super awesome. I get the heart behind this statement, I get why you're doing it, but at the same time, we want to be a little bit more academic about that discussion, okay? Also, most of my students would not use a semicolon, even though I've sort of taught them how to do it several times. My dog is clawing at me right now. Sorry. So yeah, let me take that out. Actually, let me undo so that I have the original statement that I put there. Forward one. Okay. Now, so that's all you're really doing in your conclusion. I know that some of that seems complicated, right? And it is if you want to have a profound sort of conclusion. However, the essence of the conclusion, again, very simple, okay? If you restate your thesis, restate your reasoning, and tell me just sort of why this might matter, you're going to get a good grade on your conclusion, all right? Now, if you blow me away with something like this is going to be the ultimate icing on the cake. Your paper is going to be viewed very fondly when I go to start grading it, right? Because you have to remember that your intro is your first impression of your paper that I get, but this is the last impression of your paper that I get, right? And it's right after this that I'm going to start clicking those buttons on the rubric to decide where the paper falls on the grade, right? So a couple of reasons that this is important, all right? Outside of that, that's it. I also have a example of a conclusion down here. So, you know, if you didn't watch this video, if you were just going through, this is one that's based on this is one where I'm just making fun of students based on assessment results of students who don't routinely focus in class. It is clear that students, in order to be successful, must take class seriously and should look at learning as a lifelong endeavor that they will never be rid of. Yeah, so it's just me kind of throwing a little sass at you guys. But it still serves the same purpose, follows the same format. All right. So if you were ever confused about conclusions, I hope this video helped you out. If you're on your final step of the essay process, congratulations, you're basically done now. I might create a video on MLA format just so you can see how all of these things should be pasted together, put together, and so on. But at this point, you're essentially done. Now, my last suggestion to you before I leave you all is probably that if you got done a day early, an hour early, or something like that, you should go through your paper, revise it, read it out loud so that you understand what you sound like, right? This is going to give you opportunities to add more. It's going to give you opportunities to fix things that are incorrect, like this, from unopulent, right? Party, A-N. I actually knew that before Google popped it up. I don't know what its beef with Revel is. Let's see. Reveal. Shut up, Google. This is why you don't want to trust the internet that much. Okay. But yeah, so again, hopefully this process has helped you. Hopefully you have some time to revise. As you get faster at this, you're going to have more and more time to kind of go back and look at your paper and make it stronger, right? Hopefully you are not trying to blaze through this process in the last minute. That's why I usually give you guys about a week to work through these steps, all right? Again, like, comment, subscribe if you feel that this video was helpful. If you like this content, leave me comments about where you're struggling, what you thought was interesting. Hit me up on Zoom, email me, or any of those things to get in contact. Thanks again for watching. See you next time.